Confessions are possibly the most powerful evidence in any criminal prosecution. To hear a person accept responsibility for a criminal act in his or her own words makes an impression that is hard to overcome. It tends to be a general consensus that if a person confesses to a crime, then he or she is guilty of that crime. However, research concedes that far too often in our justice system, wrongful convictions are the result of false confessions. The obvious question here is this: what factors motivate a person to confess to a crime he or she did not commit? Studies have proven that false confessions are predominantly due to the questionable interrogation tactics employed by law enforcement, particularly isolation, confrontation, and minimization. It first needs to be understood that the whole purpose and point of an interrogation is to get a confession. Leading forensic psychologist Saul Kassin, according to him, stated that current interrogation methods in which physical abuse is illegal is now a more psychologically focused process. In 2007, he surveyed 631 North American detectives on what the most frequently used interrogation tactics are on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being never used and 5 being always used. The results are presented here in this bar graph. As you can see, tactics such as isolation, confrontation, and minimization are among the top employed tactics used during an interrogation. To begin with, isolation is the process of secluding a suspect in a small, soundproof room, usually housed with hard, uncomfortable furniture, with the purpose of inducing anxiety and a desire to just want to escape from the situation. As we can see from our chart here, it is the most employed interrogation tactic, being used almost always. In this stage of an interrogation, light switches, thermostat controls, and telephones are often kept out of reach to foster a feeling of having no control over the situation, heightening that anxiety, and psychologically breaking down the suspect, setting them up for the confrontation. Next, confronting the suspect with assertions, overt assertions of guilt, is designed to lead the suspect into making an incriminating statement or incriminating themselves in the crime. We see here from the chart it is the second most used interrogation tactic. It is during this stage that policemen are not only permitted but are encouraged to use deceit as a method to gain a confession. One tactic that proves particularly problematic is the presentation of false incriminating evidence against a person. Professors Kassin and Keichel performed a study and found that 69% of the participants signed a false confession admitting to a mock crime despite the fact that they were completely innocent when a false witness was presented against them. Also, it is during this stage where officers make very overt assertions of incontestable guilt and interrupt denials when people try to make a defense of their innocence. Finally, minimization is the process of morally justifying a crime and offering possible leniency in exchange for a confession. It is during this stage that officers will use statements like, "Well, we know you didn't mean to do it. Just tell us what happened." Another study found that minimization greatly increased false confessions because people had the expectation that they were going to be shown mercy if they just confessed. We see that here as on our chart. Don't be confused by the fact that it is listed last. By now, these other tactics have usually already worked. It seems unfathomable that a person would confess to a crime, to a brutal crime, when he or she is truly innocent, but the fact is it does happen. The circumstances surrounding such confessions have been largely studied and are consistent in the results. It appears that the questionable interrogation tactics employed by law enforcement, this systematic set of psychological processes, including isolation, confrontation, and minimization, greatly increase the occurrence of false confessions. When these factors come into play, false confessions can possibly lead to the wrongful conviction of an innocent person. And now we have time for a couple of questions. So if anyone has any questions, I'll take them at this time. Amy?
How often do false confessions occur?
Well, the answer actually is unknown. This type of statistic is hard to quantify, so psychologists haven't been able to actually study or gain an answer as to how often it occurs. However, according to studies, 20 to 25% of DNA exonerations found to have involved a false confession. To illustrate that, out of 500 conviction cases, that would mean that 125 of them confessed falsely to the crime. Any other questions?
What could prevent false confessions?
Well, psychologists, feel that first and foremost, videotaping any interaction between interrogators and suspects from beginning to end, from the time they first make contact to the end of that contact, will greatly decrease the occurrence of false confessions and will keep confessions from being able to be questioned during court. It will eliminate that problem. Also, reform made to certain tactics that are currently used. For example, the complete elimination of presenting false evidence against a suspect. A lot of psychologists feel has no place in an interrogation. Any other questions? Okay, well, I want to thank you for your time. That will end the presentation.